Games should be designed for different age ranges, not just the content, but the controls, the level designs, the amount of reading required, and what does success look like? Because these games will bring our new players experiences quickly and in a carefully designed manner to help them. This is kind of a crawl, walk, run method. We want our proteges to learn the new skill safely, practice it a few times, and when they can't get it wrong, we can add a new skill on top. What are these basic skills that we need to be looking for? Kind of similar to real life, right? How to get around, how to interact, trying interaction and movement together, how to do multiple actions at the same time, and how to tie multiple actions with movement. And ultimately, how can we control all actions at the same time? That's a toughie. Before we start playing traditional video games, most of us have already played the simplest versions of games before. Mobile gaming on a touchscreen device. These are more intuitive and easier to understand. I touch here, something happens in response. Kids without fine motor control skills really enjoy this stage. My kids really love Minion Rush and Fruit Ninja and Sonic the Hedgehog. However, I was recently introduced to Khan Academy and we'll start our youngest with education games that cover reading and writing and math, and they don't have any microtransactions. Second place behind this is Lucas and Friends, made by RV App Studio. Both of these use touch screens and are ad-free, teaching the basics. Even with that, I suggest keeping the screen time to under an hour and modify based on your own experiences with your kids. And I personally wouldn't start any screens before the age of 2, maybe 3, if at all possible. Yeah, my wife definitely influenced that one. If we're asking, is this really gaming for younger kids? It's gamification of what we want them to learn, so yes. And for adults who want to start gaming, still yes, but soon enough, we'll be ready for that first progression. Step 1, when can we start with console gaming? For younger gamers, it's probably somewhere between the ages of 4 and 6. If they can start dressing themselves, they can hold the controller and do an input. But we don't want to get into a lot of inputs all at once. Simply navigating a 2D or 3D space can be difficult because if I move the joystick this way, my character does something different on screen. This spatial difference between the controller and the screen can be confusing. We initially started with Mario Kart on the Switch because the game can be set so the karts always go, but they're not fast. And if you have kids like mine, they like doing the drive off into the lava, and they don't like completing the races. But to play correctly requires multiple button inputs at the same time and the spatial awareness between the controller input and the screen output. I was constantly beating my kids without remorse. While they had fun, they couldn't understand what I was doing to be so much faster and better, and they got very verbal with their frustrations and not wanting to play a race against me again. And I took pity on them, and we moved on to other games like Kirby and Minecraft, and we recently purchased the Untitled Goose Game. But with a lot of these, it's still complex controls. My kids didn't really care about a lot of those things. They were just enthralled with navigating the worlds. But these all required me to be there at all times to read and provide directions and tell them which buttons they needed. I wasn't playing with them as much as constantly teaching them the same things over and over again without much forward progress. This meant that I started looking for a game with simple navigation, one button at a time, no enemies, spoken instructions. And I found 2 of them. So the fix for problem 1. Paw Patrol on a Roll is a great example of a simple game that allows kids to play without risk of failing. It's a 2D exploration game that doesn't require collecting anything or battling enemies, and all the dialogue is spoken for those that can't read yet. Next up is Paw Patrol Pup Save Adventure Bay. It's very similar, but now we have a 3D environment. It's still single button, QuickTime events, it's little kid QuickTime, and simple mini games designed to help increase familiarity and comfort with the controllers. These 2 games hit all the wickets for a kid's first game. Safe, friendly characters they probably already know of, simple instructions, navigation is easy, actions are single button presses, and are cued visually and verbally, and everything is rather simple. My only issue with these is that the 2 games together aren't cheap, coming in at $30 a piece. But I also have Xbox Game Pass and PlayStation Plus, so they were free-ish on there. Some alternatives are Disneyland Adventures and Rush, which is all Pixar characters, and Sonic Racing. These games also introduce mini-games and opportunities to fail, and there's some additional frustrations, but for the most part, they're well liked by kids. My wife's favorite console game in recent years has been Animal Crossing New Horizons. This covers all the bases except for it's reading intensive, especially to start with, and it's also on the Nintendo Switch as an exclusive. So when we're done with this step, our proteges should be feeling confident in their ability to get around the digital landscape and have simple interactions. For me, I think that the Paw Patrol games are definitely the two to start with because it's very simple, it's very safe, and if you can catch them on sale or you have Xbox Game Pass or PlayStation Network, absolutely phenomenal because you're not spending any extra money on this. It's probably somewhere between the ages of 4 and... Now that our proteges have mastered navigation, we need to add our next layer, movement plus interaction. Instead of movement, then interaction. We want to have obstacles and enemies and potentially failing and having to start over part of the game. And we kind of want to minimize this risk unless your kid is really entertained like my youngest is. My favorite game that we played to work on these skills is Kirby and the Forgotten Land. I didn't realize it at the time, but Kirby had a secret weapon, Bandana Waddle Dee. While he isn't invincible, he respawns quickly, can fight bosses and the enemies, interact with the environment, and just do all the things. But if my mini-me was getting frustrated and annoyed, his Waddle Dee was tied to my Kirby character, and when I left, so did he. This meant that whenever my kids were getting frustrated, we were able to keep the pace going, to keep the fun going, but also work on those skills in a different way. I also had a classic game suggested to me, and that was Sonic Origins. It's all about running and jumping, and now with the single button press, Sonic is able to jump and beat enemies. Admittedly, Sonic gets fast, but that can make gamers feel better and help them improve their reaction speed as they progress. The secret to Sonic Origins is that we play as Sonic during the boss fights and let our little gamers beat up on the evil Dr. Robotnik, and they're playing as Tails, and he is invincible unlike Bandana Waddle Dee. This gives our proteges the opportunity to increase their confidence as they practice against a big boss and beat it on their own. Sense of pride and accomplishment, anybody? Absolutely. And I found 2 of them. Next, we need to start adding in some more complexity. We can do this with adding more buttons or multifunction buttons. This is where we start looking at Mario Kart 8, everybody's beloved kid racer. And it's a lot more complicated than it looks. It's accelerating, braking, drifting, steering, and using items. But that's okay because we can simplify the controls through the accessibility settings, letting newer players focus on steering and using items. Not only that, but we can make the game more or less difficult by picking specific tracks and increasing or decreasing the engine size. At 50 cc's, brakes are optional. At 200 cc's, it's absolutely required just to place in the middle of the pack. There's also adaptive computer-controlled characters. That basically means that they're going to stay around the skill level of the player, which reduces the potential of humiliation and frustration, and our gamers will always feel like they're competitive. But this level of complexity is also similar to original NES games, and we can look back at some classic favorites such as top-down Zelda games. Why those instead of Mario? Both games let us see the enemies around us and move around pretty freely. So for 2 reasons really. 1, Mario always has to move forward where Zelda's a little slower paced and allows newer players to focus on the buttons and what to do with them. One button is always mapped to the sword, and the other one kind of rotates between items or skills. Compare this to trying to press the run button in Mario while using the other half of their tiny thumbs to try and jump over the gap. It's just a little harder. Another option here would be the mainline Pokemon series, but it requires a lot of reading. So if your kid is one of those that loves to read, this game is perfect with simple menus and interface, a ton of reading, cute characters, the pocket monsters, and it's kind of a simple role-playing game. Players travel, they find Pokemon, they battle, they catch this, and try to become a Pokemon master. The gameplay slows down for the player to be able to understand what's happening and choose how they want to react. My favorite version, Legends Arceus, is a little more advanced with several simultaneous controls required, and it's kind of a natural transition into our next step. Unless your kid is really... Well, actually, as I think about it, Legends Arceus is a couple extra traits that might take it to step 5. So let's put that to the side for now and focus on how we can get new players to tie multiple actions back into their new digital spatial awareness. Congratulations, we finally made it to Mario, or his brother's house, Luigi's Mansion 3, or one of my favorite relaxing games, Nova Drift. These games flatten the environment back to 2D and allow players to focus on completing the multiple tasks required. With all 3 of our characters traveling in 2D space and having multiple actions going on and taking place at the same time. There's running and jumping, timing it to make it over the gap, or hop on a Koopa, clear a room of ghosts, or defeat the never-ending horde of space invaders. And from here, we can really see how gaming works click just in time for the fifth and final step. Feel better and help them improve controlling the camera and the character at the same time. The first time this was a thing was one of my first games that I bought myself. It was Mario 64 on the Nintendo 64. I remember it being so much different that the cameraman was a separate character. Not until I was older did I realize that this was intentional to help me understand the new skills required for it. Nowadays, I take for granted getting to manipulate the third-person camera in some games and forget to remind my wife and kids. It can be a deeply disorienting feeling, but just like the rest of the steps, it takes practice and patience to develop a new skill. And suddenly, any modern role-playing games, shooters, sports games, and many others just become much more accessible once you understand moving character and moving camera. Now we've made it to the end of the basics class. All these steps are how we can gently ease someone into gaming, but there are different ways, some with more steps, others with less, but these skills pale in comparison to what we as parents need to do to ensure a proper gaming environment at home. For those steps and tips, watch this video right here. This is Wes from Ridir Gaming. Do good, play hard, game on, and I'll see you next time.